Maria, an elderly woman with a gentle countenance and a generous heart, had lived a long life in her red brick house in Utrecht. It was there, alongside her husband, Hendrik, that she had raised Tejas, Lotta, and Jeroen, instilling in them the importance of love and family unity. However, the joyful and close-knit times had gradually faded over the years, especially after the sudden loss of Hendrik, a man whose calm and steadfast presence had seemed like the invisible pillar holding the family together. With her husband's absence, Maria began to feel her children, once so affectionate and close, growing increasingly distant. This distance became all the more evident in the silent days spent in her old house, where phone calls became rare and visits even scarcer. Tejas, Lotta, and Jeroen seemed consumed by their own lives, ambitions, and personal challenges, as if their mother's life was something they could easily leave behind. The situation took an even more painful turn on a cold autumn afternoon when the three children gathered to have a conversation with Maria. They had decided to sell the house where she had lived for so long. They argued that, with the proceeds from the sale, they could ease some accumulated debts and tackle financial difficulties they were facing. Maria tried to protest, explaining how much that home meant to her. But her words were brushed aside, as if her pleas were no more than a distant murmur. A few days later, with few options and feeling increasingly fragile, Maria was taken to a care home in Amersfoort. Saying goodbye to her home, to every corner brimming with memories and laughter, felt like leaving behind a piece of her own life story. With a heavy heart and a growing sense of abandonment, Maria entered the home where she would spend her days ahead, hoping that her children might at least visit her there from time to time. Yet what Maria did not foresee was the loneliness she would face in this new chapter of her life. The void left by the indifference of Tejas, Lotta, and Jeroen seemed to grow with each passing day. At first, she counted the hours, waiting for one of them to appear, hoping for a hug, a conversation, any sign of affection. But the visits became rarer, and over time, almost non-existent. With each day, the silent blow of her children's absence echoed in her heart, leaving a pain that words could not convey. Maria, who had always been the heart of the family, now felt cast aside and forgotten. She couldn't understand how those to whom she had devoted her life and love could treat her with such coldness. The hurried glances and automatic smiles she received during their brief visits only intensified her sense of being in a world where her presence no longer mattered. The loneliness Maria felt in the care home in Amersfoort was deep and unyielding, making her question whether a lifetime of love and effort truly held any value to her children. And so, Maria awaited each new day, sinking further into the sorrow of being invisible to those she had loved so dearly. Sitting in the austere room of the care home, Maria often drifted into her memories, allowing herself to revisit moments from the life she had left behind. It was her way of keeping alive the memory of a time when the world still smiled upon her, when she was surrounded by the warmth of her children and the strong, comforting presence of Hendrik. In the quiet of that room, she transported herself to the streets of Utrecht, where the days glowed with the promise of a prosperous and meaningful life. In her youth, Maria had been a lively, spirited woman, someone who believed wholeheartedly in the power of family and unity. Together with Hendrik, she had built not only a house but a home, a place of love and affection where her children grew up with solid values. Every corner of the old house held memories, from the children's games in the garden to the long family dinners filled with laughter and shared stories. In those days, her children were her reason for living. Maria and Hendrik did everything they could to provide Tejas, Lotta, and Jeroen with a childhood filled with security and affection. In Utrecht, where everyone knew each other, they were an admired and respected family, a living testament to the idea that love was at the heart of everything. Sunday dinners were sacred, and celebrations, especially birthdays and weddings, were cherished gatherings, binding everyone together in ways Maria once thought would last forever. However, as she recalled all of this, Maria couldn't help but notice how much things had changed since Hendrik's passing. Over the years, she had watched the bond between her children grow weaker. Tejas had distanced himself in pursuit of a successful career abroad. Lotta, always preoccupied with her own dreams and concerns, had grown more introspective, and Jeroen, though once close in his youth, had become increasingly reserved and distant. It was as if each of them had chosen to follow their own path, leaving behind the family ties that once held them together. These memories stirred a bittersweet mixture of nostalgia and sorrow. Maria missed those days when she could count on having her children and husband around her, when life still seemed full of promises, and she, in some way, felt valued and needed. Yet, with each memory relived, she also felt the weight of the present, the pain of seeing those she loved so distant and indifferent. Still, remembering was her way of keeping the past alive, a way to find solace in what once was. Deep in her heart, Maria held onto a small thread of hope. Perhaps, one day, her children would remember the values she and Hendrik had worked so hard to teach. Perhaps, someday, they would come to understand the true worth of family love. But, for now, all she had was the memory of a prosperous, happy life, now distant, almost like a dream. Maria's days in the care home in Amersfoort were marked by an oppressive monotony. Each morning was indistinguishable from the last, and the silence in her room grew heavier by the day. Here, Maria spent most of her time alone, accompanied only by the memories in her mind and her vacant gaze out the window. It was a cruel contrast to the life once filled with affection and movement in Utrecht. Now, the hours dragged on, void of any promise of joy or change. She would watch the other residents in their routines, yet even among them, Maria felt isolated. Many of the other residents were equally lonely, their stories different but sharing a common thread: abandonment. It was as if this place held the souls that society had chosen to forget, and this realization only deepened Maria's sorrow. Deep down, she had never imagined spending her final years so far removed from those to whom she had dedicated her life. Occasionally, on weekends, the phone would ring, and Maria would hurry to answer, her heart racing with the hope that a familiar voice would greet her. But more often than not, the calls were brief, cold, almost mechanical. Tejas, Lotte, and Jeroen always seemed rushed, entangled in commitments and worries that took all their time. "Sorry, Mum, this week's just too busy, maybe next week." Or, "I hope you're doing okay. I promise I'll try to visit soon." Empty words, delayed promises that weighed on Maria's heart like stones. With each interrupted call, each cancelled visit, Maria felt her hope diminish a little more. She began to realize that contact with her children was becoming increasingly rare, almost non-existent. A growing solitude expanded within her, like an unbearable emptiness that even the sweetest memories could not fill. At night, when everyone else was asleep, Maria was overwhelmed by a silent despair. The stillness of the care home at night was almost deafening, as if each absent sound only highlighted the absence of those who should have been by her side. The feeling of abandonment was a pain she had never expected to endure. She wondered if her children thought of her with affection or if, to them, she had become no more than a distant, burdensome obligation. Every detail of her surroundings reminded her that her presence here went unnoticed not only by her children but by those around her as well. Most of the time, she was just another elderly resident, one among many faces populating the home. The staff were always polite and professional, offering friendly gestures, but there was a lack of warmth, the touch of familiarity that she so deeply yearned for. She knew, deep down, that they were doing their best, yet she also knew that it wasn't enough. Even surrounded by people, Maria felt invisible. It was as if her existence had lost its value, as if her years of love and devotion were now just faint memories, fading a little more with each passing day. She felt a profound emptiness, an overwhelming sense of abandonment that threatened to crush what remained of her inner strength. And, with a sigh, Maria wondered if her children would ever understand the pain of being forgotten by those we love. Holding on to a final thread of hope, she still wished that, before it was too late, Tejas, Lotte, and Jeroen might rediscover the true value of love and family respect. The days at the care home remained long and lonely for Maria, but amid the desolation, something unexpected began to brighten her life: a sincere friendship with Willem. Willem was a volunteer at the home, a humble man with a calm expression and a constant, gentle smile, known for his ability to listen and his warm manner with the elderly residents. Each day, Willem walked the corridors of the care home, offering comforting words and bringing small distractions to the residents: a casual conversation, a shared story, or a brief reading. When he first visited Maria's room, she had no idea just how much his presence would become a balm to her soul. At first, their conversations were brief and tentative, as if both were exploring the unfamiliar ground of a new friendship. Willem spoke of his childhood, the landscapes of Amersfoort, and his grandson, who was battling a serious illness and needed special care. In turn, Maria shared stories from her youth in Utrecht and her life with Hendrik and her children. With each encounter, she felt a growing familiarity with this kind-hearted man, and for a moment, the loneliness seemed to recede. Willem, with his warm demeanor, was the first in a long time to listen to Maria's stories with genuine attention and interest. He seemed to understand the sorrows and longings she carried. In return, Maria felt that, at least to him, her presence held value and meaning. As the days passed, Willem became her confidant, someone with whom she could share not only her memories but also her thoughts and hopes for the future, however brief those future days might be. It was during one of these conversations that Maria learned more about Willem's grandson. The boy required expensive treatments and constant care, something Willem was doing his best to provide. Although Maria knew her ability to help was limited, an idea began to take root in her heart. If she could not receive love from her own children, perhaps she could at least leave a legacy of affection for someone who truly deserved it. So, Maria made a decision that would perhaps be her final act of generosity. In secret, she gathered a few family heirlooms, cherished pieces of jewelry, and a small sum of savings she had managed to hold onto over the years. She placed these items in a small lockbox, along with a letter addressed to Willem, explaining her wish that he use this legacy to help his grandson have a better life. In the letter, Maria expressed her gratitude for the friendship and comfort Willem had brought to her darkest days, revealing how important he had become to her in this lonely time. For Maria, this gesture was a way to make a difference in the life of someone who truly understood and respected her. She knew that, even without great wealth, she could offer something that might ease Willem's burdens a little. That night, after writing the letter and placing the lockbox safely aside, Maria felt a calm she hadn't experienced in a long time. By thinking of the well-being of Willem's grandson, she was able to rekindle some of the love and compassion she had once dedicated to her own children. This final act of generosity filled her heart with a gentle tranquility, a feeling of a mission accomplished. Even if Tejas, Lotte, and Jeroen would never know of her gesture, she knew that, at least for Willem and his grandson, her legacy would live on. For the first time in many years, Maria went to sleep with a faint smile on her lips, feeling that, in Willem's heart, she was still seen and remembered with affection. The news of Maria's passing reached Tejas, Lotte, and Jeroen abruptly. Each of them, in their busy, separate lives, paused for a moment as they received the message informing them of their mother's departure. There were no immediate tears, but an uncomfortable silence settled, mixed with a vague sense of guilt that each tried to push aside. Only a few days later, when they gathered at the care home to handle their mother's remaining affairs, did they discover something that would leave an indelible mark on each of them. Entering Maria's room, they noticed a small box on the table, accompanied by a letter addressed to Willem, the volunteer she had befriended in her final months. Feeling curious and, in some way, uneasy, they opened the letter and began reading the words their mother had left behind. The letter was touching, and it detailed Maria's final act of generosity. She explained how she wanted that modest inheritance to be dedicated to Willem's grandson, who was struggling with health challenges. Reading the letter felt like a silent but painful blow. Tejas, Lotte, and Jeroen were overwhelmed by a bitter sense of regret. This simple, yet grand gesture confronted them with their own shortcomings. Maria, despite facing loneliness and abandonment, still found the strength to think of others, to act with a generous and empathetic heart. Her children, however, too wrapped up in their own concerns, had failed to notice her solitude or the love she continued to hold for them, even in the face of their indifference. Lotte was the first to break the silence. With tear-filled eyes, she confessed that she had never realized how much her mother was suffering or how strong her heart had been. Tejas and Jeroen, though silent, felt the same deep remorse. The regret transformed into a crushing weight, a sorrow they could never undo. That farewell letter seemed to speak directly to them, laying bare how they had failed to give Maria the love and attention she so richly deserved. Each word of their mother echoed in their minds, bringing a bitterness that was hard to bear. They realized that their mother, until the very end, was someone who thought of others before herself, someone who, despite being forgotten, never lost faith in the value of love and kindness. Maria's final act left them with a lasting reminder, a memory they would never be able to erase. Now, alone in the room, Tejas, Lotte, and Jeroen were forced to confront their own failings and bear the knowledge that they had missed the chance to return their mother's unconditional love. It was too late to apologize to Maria, but the regret they felt might just be the first step toward a deeper transformation. The days following the reading of Maria's letter drifted by like a dense fog for Tejas, Lotte, and Jeroen. They gathered at Lotte's home in Amersfoort, a place where they had rarely all been together in recent years. There, for the first time, they faced each other with the pain and shame they carried. Each brought their own justifications and regrets, but in that moment any attempt at excuses felt hollow. The truth was that they had failed as children, and they all knew it. The conversation started hesitantly. Lotta, visibly uncomfortable, tried to break the silence. "I never thought Mum was so alone," she said, her voice trembling. "How did we let this happen?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Tejas sighed, his gaze distant. As the eldest, he had always felt responsible for the family after Hendrik's death. But in his rush to achieve his own goals, he had neglected his mother. "I thought she was all right," he murmured, more to himself than to his siblings. "I was just so busy with work, the travel. I never stopped to think." Jeroen, the most introspective of the three, shook his head silently. He knew that by distancing himself, he had created a gap that now felt irreparable. "I thought she was being looked after," he said in a near whisper. "After all, she was in a care home, with people to give her attention. I thought that was enough." But as he said this, he felt the weight of his own indifference. As if care were just a matter of meeting basic needs, without realizing what Maria truly needed, their love and their presence. Hearing Jeroen's words, Lotta suddenly erupted in a burst of anger that surprised even herself. "Care? What kind of care is that?" Her words spilled out, full of pain. "She was our mother. She gave us everything she had, and we abandoned her as if she were a burden." Her outburst unleashed the tears she had tried to hold back until then. With each sentence, the guilt they all felt became more apparent. Lotta continued, her eyes glistening with a mixture of sadness and regret. "She left everything to a stranger because we, her own children, weren't there for her." Lotta's words struck Tejas and Jeroen like a blow. For the first time, they truly felt the depth of their error. Maria's final act of generosity had left a mark on them, forcing them to confront how far they had strayed from the values she and Hendrik had cherished. In that moment, they understood that Maria's love, her kindness, and her ability to forgive, even in the face of abandonment, were virtues they had failed to uphold. A silent pause followed, in which each of them, lost in thought, confronted their choices and values. They knew that nothing they did now could erase what Maria had endured in her final days. But at the same time, they felt that this pain, this irreversible loss, might be a catalyst for change. Finally, Tejas spoke, his eyes holding a determination his siblings hadn't seen in him before. "We have to do something," he said. "We can't undo the past, but we can start living in a way that honors what she taught us." Jeroen and Lotta nodded silently, agreeing that the only way to confront their regret was to transform their attitudes and values. As they left Lotta's home, each of them felt a new purpose weighing on them. They knew they had a long road ahead to repair the damage caused by their distance. But Maria's final act, that gesture of generosity, had planted a seed of change within them. It was a beginning, however late, to learn the true meaning of family love and unity. The months following Maria's passing brought profound changes for Tejas, Lotta, and Jeroen. The pain of loss and the weight of regret affected each of them so deeply that, over time, they began to re-evaluate their lives and priorities. Deep down, they felt this was the only way to honor their mother's memory and her final act of kindness. Tejas, always the practical one focused on work, decided it was time to slow down. He began to dedicate more time to his family and those around him, rediscovering simple pleasures he had previously been too busy to appreciate. He learned to value the small conversations, shared moments, and the chance to show care and attention. At home, he made an effort to teach his own children the importance of presence and empathy, a lesson he had come to understand only too late. Lotta, moved by guilt and remorse, sought to reconcile with her own understanding of family. She began regularly visiting elderly relatives and involving herself in causes supporting the welfare of older adults, volunteering at care homes, inspired by Willem, the volunteer who had been a comfort to her mother. Though painful, the experience helped her realize the difference that presence and affection could make to those who felt isolated. Jeroen, in turn, dedicated himself to restoring his bond with his siblings and his own family. He decided it was essential to keep alive the family connection that Maria and Hendrik had cherished. He organized family gatherings, striving to keep everyone close and reinforcing the importance of unity. He knew he could never turn back time, but he believed that by living according to the values his mother had embodied, he could, in a way, set his life on the right course. Gradually, the three siblings found a kind of peace, a sense of acceptance that came with time and their efforts to live by the lessons Maria had imparted. The remorse remained, but it transformed into a silent guide, reminding them to live more generously and mindfully. Deep down, they knew that, in some way, their mother was still with them, not only in their memories but in the choices they made and the way they viewed life. Years later, at a family gathering, Tejas, Lotta, and Jeroen brought their families together to reminisce. They shared stories about Maria, recalling her generous heart, her lessons, and her unconditional love. In the end, they realized that, while they hadn't been perfect children, they could still honor their mother's memory by living the way she had always wished for them. Maria's story and her final act of generosity had changed her children and left a lasting mark, proving that true love is the kind that grows, even in absence. Though they couldn't erase the past, Tejas, Lotta, and Jeroen found, through their mother's memory, a new way to build their future, with more love, generosity, and an unwavering commitment to those they held dear.